And so one of the techniques that we have used for preserving knowledge in my classes is concept mapping. And actually when we came here in 2004, we talked about concept mapping because one of my doctoral students, Ludmila, really addressed concept mapping. Now here's an example of a concept map developed by an individual student to describe the African Virtual University. And his project, I assigned different institutions to my students and they have to share experiences. And here was the concept map he developed to discuss his framework for explaining the African Virtual University. So actually we evaluated his learning through this concept map. The second one was a group moderated discussion, and the group that moderated the discussion synthesized the information using this concept map. So here's an example of a group putting a concept map together. And both these two concept maps were done using the inspiration program. The third one was done using CMAP, and this is where the instructor was able to help a group develop the concept map for their group project as it was being done. So normally we, as instructors, we wait till the group project is over to give them feedback, but when they were developing the concept map, the concept for the group task, using the CMAP software, which is a distributed concept mapping program, I was able to go as the instructor and comment on the different components of the project. So for example, if you look at that faculty center, that blue link, let's see if I can, this one here. If you look at that one, there is a little tab here, and that's where I have given a comment. And because this is online, I cannot show you, but here's another one where I have gone and provided a comment. So I, as the instructor, was able to provide them with comments as they developed the group project. This group project was on diabetes prevention. They developed a program to train people in diabetes prevention for the state of New Mexico. So I had some group of people in health education in this class. So one of the ways that we can change the culture of assessment is to provide feedback to people as they develop the projects. Okay. So essentially, given the basis of what I talked about, now what we have is the wisdom, community, mentoring, and learner support and knowledge innovation. One of the ways in which I take them through the learning process is to take them through a cycle of inquiry. First, they are given the case or problem or issue to be solved. Then, as a group, they initially explore what they know about the problem and they post their comments on that. Then they search for resources and share different perspectives. And they reflect and reorganize their perspectives, and they negotiate and preserve and share what they have come up with as a group with other members of the group, other members of the class. And they also preserve what they have come up with in the Knowledge Artifacts Forum. So there is a place for them to preserve what they came up as a group. So I'll show you some examples. Well, this is from my course. This is a WebCT forum. Are any of you familiar with WebCT? Do any of you use WebCT? You are familiar. Okay, this is WebCT Vista. And that's the forum that so I'm giving you some examples from my module 4. And here, the purpose of that module was to explore how information and communication technology can be used to provide non-formal distance education for women in developing countries. That was the goal. So first of all, what I do is I orient my students to the learning outcomes and then to the learning process and procedure. On the right, usually each of these modules span 2 weeks. On the right, I have dates. That is, when you give them 2 weeks, many people wait till the end of the 2 weeks to do their assignments. So I tell them, well, for this module, we start right from the beginning. October 8th most probably is the start date. You're supposed to read your thing. Then from October 8th to the 10th, you should have done this thing, so that I pace them so that they don't wait till the end. Because if they wait till the end, they've lost it. Then on the left side is the table of contents for the module, which describes the process that we go through. Okay, so next we go to the learning process, and these are some examples of the learning process and procedure. So I'm going to let you read that. Okay. And then I say the cycle of inquiry consists of 5 stages. First, we present the case. You initially explore what you know about the case. Then you find resources, share your perspectives, reflect and reorganize them, and then you negotiate your conclusions and you preserve the conclusions you came through. Okay, so the table of contents, you can see, first of all, we give the overview of the module, which is what you see here, that's the overview. Then I have a message from the facilitators, a little message, why this is important, why is it important for us to consider how to help women in developing countries utilize ICT. Then the course is divided, the module is divided into, in this case, 2 case studies, sometimes more than 2. So I put the case study for group 1, case study for group 2. The case study for group 1 was to develop health education, to develop a plan to provide health education to Afghani women who were in refugee camps in Pakistan. And I had gone to Pakistan and really seen this, and I realized this is a critical need. I had also found some literature. The second case study was to help Nigerian women market their crafts on the internet. Then I have the readings and resources. Then we have the group discussions for the 2 groups, readings and resources. Then the knowledge artifacts forum is where they actually post their stuff. And then we have the self and group evaluation form. They evaluate themselves as well as the group members and their participation. And then they go to their private journal and they reflect on what they learn. So that's how I know what they learn. Okay, here's the learning challenge. And essentially that's a little picture of, that's a picture of a woman with a chicken. And essentially she's asking the question, how can I market my chickens on the internet? And then that will lead into the questions that they will address. How does the cultural context impact the use of ICT for non-formal education and training of women at a distance? And what are the challenges to utilizing ICT for the education of women in developing countries? So what are some of the challenges that they have to face when they are going to use information technology? How can we design appropriate solutions through the use of ICT to empower women in developing countries? So what are some of the ways in which we can help them design it? So actually, the 2 groups had to come up with a grant proposal at the end. And this really was a role play situation. And the role play consisted of 3 roles. One was the leader of the women's group in this developing country. One was the leader of the non-governmental organization that helped them write it. And the third one was a Peace Corps volunteer who I had to put the American perspective in. The Peace Corps volunteer who was in this community helping this group develop this proposal. So here is the directions for the group discussions. Here are the group discussion, stuff. And I'm going to go really fast through this. Here are some examples. In this case, one student really did not go online to select the role. And so the group is discussing about it. And here, Rebecca is saying, here we are with a new learning challenge and a whole set of new rules. I've read the learning challenge and our case study, and if you don't mind, I would like to be the leader of the women's group who is requesting help to write the proposal. Please let me know what you think about it. So she selected her role and she wants to know what others think about it. And then this is Jason, who actually was located in Japan, talking about his perspectives. And Louisa, the third member, had not come in at this time and they were concerned. So what I do is I go there and I say, if you haven't heard from Louisa yet, go ahead and select the roles that you've already talked about and Louisa will come in. And then actually Louisa does come in later. Here's an example from my faculty development course in Moodle that I did in Sri Lanka. And actually my students, my doctoral students at UNM functioned as e-mentors to train faculty in Sri Lanka how to do interactive learning online. And the 3 problems I had selected were 3 problems in the city. One was how to help street children, how to solve the traffic congestion in Sri Lanka, and how to solve the garbage disposal problem in Colombo. Now, because the faculty I trained came from different disciplines, engineering, medicine, you name it, I had to select a problem that was common to all of them. So I selected the problems that I saw on the streets. And my students learned about the problems in Sri Lanka. My trainees in Sri Lanka learned about how to do interactive learning from my students. So it was a great experience because, e-mentoring was used for facilitating knowledge construction through intercultural experiences. Here is the Moodle wiki that they used for actually writing the report, and my students would go there and write the report also. Okay, can I ask for any questions you might have about designing and developing and what they said before I just talk briefly about assessing? Any questions? Any experiences?
Social presence, and you were explaining, it was really very clear how you understand the community and how you favor to build a community. And it seems that sometimes you mix the idea of the community and the social presence, but as you are an expert in aspects related with culture aspects, you were mentioning some examples of, for example, the importance of presenting yourself and introducing yourself and being part of the community, but this is very related to the culture.
Very good. Yes.
And
how did you do it?
I mean, because this is one part of the social presence, but not only. I mean, there are some other aspects that you were also mentioning when you were talking about how to build a community.
Right.
But, for example, what you were saying, I think that most of us wouldn't agree with this, because we could agree, but we are not used to, maybe, or we are not.
Can I say something? I'm from the U.S., and I think I would present myself very differently online in the U.S. than I would here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And how would you present yourself?
Not so much
here.
Self-disclosure here.
Right.
No.
Right. In fact,
coming from Britain, we would self-disclose. No. I would say, from the experience out here, there is online. There is a tradition of the Brits being shy and not wanting to disclose, but online, our experience here is that is not an issue at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But what you bring up is an excellent question, because social presence is culturally determined.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let me give you an example. I did a study of group process and group development with the Monterrey Tech Virtual University in Monterrey, Mexico. And what they said was, what the Mexican participants said was, because in their society there is unequal distribution of power. There is a great power distance, as Hofstede would call it. They said that they looked for the medium of online medium as a medium that equalizes participants. And so they don't want people to disclose too much about who they are. They are more interested in looking at what they contribute to the discussion. They evaluate a person by their contribution to the discussion, not because of who they are. So in societies where there is a high power distance, too much social presence can be problematic. And in some cultures, it's not easy to self-disclose. So let me go back to my Sri Lankan example here. And I sort of missed out on that because I was looking at the time. You can see those icons, right? Yeah. You can see the icons, the first one is a fish, the other one is a mask, and the third one is, I really cannot remember what that was. But anyway, one of the things I did was, in Sri Lanka is also a high power distance society. There is a lot of structure, between classes. Classes in this sense, there is a structure between people who have more power than less power. I had people in my training group who were department chairs, who were deans, and also very junior faculty who were assistant professors, lecturers, etc. Right? So difficult to bridge this gaps. What I said was, now when you're teaching, now these people also met face-to-face, so they knew who they were. But when you're teaching online and to people you don't know, you have to try to equalize the group. So instead of putting your picture and what you look like, you select an icon that represents you in some way and describe how that icon represents you. Then Mali, who put the fish there, said she's from the Philippines. She's one of my doc students in the US, but she's originally from the Philippines. And she said, I'm from the Philippines, and I live close to the ocean, and the fish represents who I am in this way. I put an icon of myself as a global nomad. There was this wonderful picture of a face with the world on the head, and I said, that's me, because I always link internationally. So things like that. That way, nobody, like people did not feel it, people didn't have such a difficulty telling people about themselves, because it is a difficult thing in many cultures. When I do my interactions with China, I have my students pair up with a Chinese student, and they introduce each other, not themselves, because Chinese don't want to really talk about themselves. So I have an American student talk about the Chinese partner, and the Chinese partner introduces the American to the online community. So that you can look at different ways of doing it. But what I've also found through my research is, and this is through my research looking at how cyber communities develop synchronously, and my research in Morocco and Sri Lanka, what they were telling me was when a person self-discloses, they have more of a closer connection with the person. It is not culturally appropriate to do it, in many contexts. But when they are building relationships with people who do not know, and both Sri Lanka and Morocco are high power distance cultures, they begin to disclose themselves when the other person begins to disclose a little bit about themselves also. So self-disclosure increases the level of social presence, but it is difficult to do in some cultures. But online, when they are trying to build relationships with people they do not know, they do self-disclose. Otherwise, they cannot have that connection. So it's really an interesting concept to further study, but it is so culturally determined. Okay.
May I?
Yes, sure.
I guess my question is also related to the question of culture, but it's more about the concept of community as such.
Okay.
Because my impression is that also the definition of the community is very culturally biased. And it's interesting because we had a lecture yesterday with a Spanish gentleman who was talking of his vision about the changes in education, highly individualized. So coming here today is like moving to the other side of the spectrum where we're talking about the community. For me, what I'm hearing is the individual is almost disappearing. You have to adhere to the group objectives.
Right.
Find the group identity, the shared identity. And I guess, he was a bit too much on the other side. And,
okay.
And I'm just, pending from to the other side. And the question is, how to find a balance.
Right.
Because considering, obviously you have students in many different countries. In the context here, we have international students, but the context, from what you were describing also is different. And I think the individualistic perspective is very much alive in Europe.
Really?
And I'm guessing it must be alive in some way in the States as well.
Yes.
And the question is about, how you learn to survive as an individual.
Right.
So how do we build a community that supports the individual,
right,
as well as teaches the individual to participate? Because finding the values in the group is one thing, but then supporting the individual to be an individual, but also part of a community.
Right.
I don't know if I'm explaining myself.
No, I think you explained it very well. It's a very good question. Now, in the States, they tend to be more individualistic than community-oriented. However, the States is changing too. We've seen organizations work, structure work in teams. So, teamwork is a very important concept, you develop these products in teams. And one of the things that happen is, in institutions of higher education, we teach people in an individual sense. We measure them in an individual sense. They go into organizations where they have to work in teams. Like, for example, Intel, which is a huge manufacturing plant in my city, close to my city, they all work in teams. So what happens is when they haven't had that experience working in teams, they have a difficult time fitting in many of the organizations that have become team-based. So it's not that the individual identity is totally lost in this. I think what I encourage people to do is to capture that individual identity and expertise in the final collaborative product that comes out. So most of the marks in this course are based on teamwork because, that is important to build community and encourage collaboration. I think so too. I think the medium, for the first time, we have a medium that facilitates group activity over an extended period of time. And, I was going to talk a little bit about the wiki because I think, the wiki is part of this collective intelligence toolkit that we have through Web 2.0 technologies that really helps you to do collaborative editing online over extended periods of time. It takes a long time for you to develop groups online, though. Face-to-face, you have the immediate interaction, and you're able to develop a group fairly fast. And I think decision-making takes longer online than face-to-face. Face-to-face, it's easy to make a decision. The synchronous technologies are good for decision-making purposes, so that's why it's important to include synchronous technologies in asynchronous forums, But, I remember because in this group I had one student from Japan, and my students would get up at 6 in the morning because of the time difference to talk to him so that they could make decisions, because it was hard for them to make decisions over an extended period of time.
I was just, the final thing I want to say is in Spain particularly, in the traditional university setting, there is a lot of lip service now with the Bologna changes, with the changes within Europe, paid to group work. But very often, I don't think it has anything like the level of seriousness, shall we say, that we give to what group work involves. It is the teacher saying, get into groups and do this project together. I think the online media, I don't know if this is the same in the States, but within Europe it's
somehow I think that
much
the
more
medium
hesitant.
forces us to make the group work activity more structured
And focus.
in a way. And I actually think that what we have learned from the online experience could be transferred over to face-to-face.
Absolutely.
Because if face-to-face group work generally were more structured, it might be more successful than it is. It's not just get into groups and talk, and you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah. These groups, the example I showed you the Women in Developing Countries module, they were supposed to develop a grant proposal at the end in 2 weeks. And they did it. And it was a brand new project. They took it, they did it. And there was this grant proposal you could actually submit to a funding agency. And the guy who had to play the role of the leader of the Afghan group, women's group, told me that was the best learning experience for him, because one thing is he was a guy playing the role of a woman, and also he didn't know anything about Afghani women and their social roles. And he said he learned more about Afghani women and their social roles than actually developing the group proposal, because he had to play that role, and I put him in a situation where he never thought he would be. So those are the kinds of, incidental kinds of learning that people go through when they do this group work. Okay.
You want to finish the assessment part?
Yeah, can I finish the assessment part? I'll do really fast.
We have more time for questions.
Okay. Interaction analysis, because some of you are interested in this concept, I thought I'll talk a little bit about this thing. 2 questions that have really, intrigued me as we develop communities online and collaborative learning are these 2. Was knowledge constructed within the group by means of exchanges among participants, and did individual participants change their understanding or create new personal constructions of knowledge as a result of interactions within the group. So I'm also interested in that individual changes, individual perceptions that might have changed because of the result of group interactions. Okay, so now main problem that we've had through the years is to define interaction for the online context. I'm still trying to figure this interaction out. In fact, Elena, Ludmila and I, Ludmila was one of my former doctoral students, and she's in Venezuela. Three of us have this international project to develop a model of interaction for online. And we've done our surveys and we are interviews, and we are trying to analyze the data now. But interaction is one topic that will always be an issue for distance learning. So for us, we feel that interaction is a process through which negotiation of meaning and co-creation of knowledge occurs. So if people don't interact, that process, cannot occur as well as if they do interact. So there must be some interaction. We do know that some people are lurkers. Sometimes it's good to let lurkers be lurkers. But we also need to have some kind of interaction. Otherwise, no knowledge construction will happen through interaction. Also, it should be viewed as a totality of interconnected and mutually responsive messages. Sometimes when we try to analyze messages, interaction analysis, we select a segment and analyze it, and sometimes it's cut off from the rest of the meaning. So analyzing by sentences, for example, is a problem. Also, we need to look at the entire gestalt formed by the online communications among participants, so that we see the whole rather than the parts in a separate context. Okay, so we developed in 1997 this concept of a quilt block of CMC interaction, and I'm going to let you read that. So for online context, interaction is key because the interaction helps us to build those links and weave ideas together. And what is important is when you look at the product, to look at the fabric of what happened at the end in a quilted pattern rather than just look at the separate pieces. So we developed this interaction analysis model. Connie Lowe and Terry Anderson. Connie Lowe was a doctoral student of mine, and Terry Anderson, of course, many of you know, he's from Athabasca University. And essentially, this model has been used by several, and I think Elena has used it. And I want to reflect a little bit on a cultural issue when people have applied it across cultures. According to this model, it was developed based on a debate. And as you know, a debate, now it's not the Spanish meaning of debate. It's like a debate that we have, I don't know how to distinguish that. Can you, there is, the word debate is...
In the sense of having somebody proposing, somebody...
Yes, affirmative side, negative side. Right. It's one of those debates, okay? So we had this international debate I think in 1995, prior to the World Conference on Distance Ed, where I put people on the affirmative side and the negative side. It ran for 1 week. Affirmative, negative, and then the last two were the final statements. In a debate, we want to keep the sides apart because we have to win the debate. The affirmative section wants to win the debate. The negative group wants to win the debate. Okay. So what we saw at the beginning of the discussion was sharing and comparing of information. So when the affirmative side posted first, people said, yes, I agree. Here's my experience. Here's stuff from my readings, etc. So it was sharing and comparing. Well, when the negative side introduced a different point of view at the second day, then everybody started disagreeing. So this stage we call cognitive dissonance, right? So I was a debate leader at one time, and Greg Kersley from Washington University was a debate leader on the negative side. Now, our goal was to keep these two teams separate so that they could win. But what happened was, when you polarize people, they tend to come together. So they were trying to negotiate meaning and in spite of the fact that we were trying to keep the two sides separate, they were negotiating and constructing new meaning. And there were certain threads emerged which they recognized as new ideas, and they went on to testing and modified these new ideas, and also trying to figure out how they could be applied in the real world. Not every strand of argument, but some. Now, when people have used this model to analyze dialogues in other cultural contexts, and one was the cultural context of Mexico, they found that dissonance, cognitive dissonance, did not happen, but negotiation of meaning and new construction of learning happened. Why? Because openly disagreeing with other people's ideas is not culturally acceptable. And therefore, people never openly disagreed. They built on each other's ideas, but they also constructed new meaning without openly disagreeing with each other. In the US, we generally tend to think that conflict of ideas is necessary for us to build new meaning because we want opposing points of view. But in this Mexican cultural context, they found that new meaning and negotiation of meaning happened, but without the dissonance phase. We found the same thing in Sri Lanka when we analyzed a debate in Sri Lanka. And so have the folks in Portugal. I came from the University of Aveiro, where they are using this model, and they didn't find the dissonance.
No, just a question. When the discussion, or was it a debate format in Mexico also?
No, it wasn't a debate format.
Because the debate format
generates the dissonance.
Generates dissonance.
Right. So this is why I prefaced it by saying it was developed based on a debate. However, generally in the US, we tend to think that conflicting ideas are necessary for creation of new meaning. And we encourage that. But in these other cultures, it wasn't evident. So, of course, when I do the revision, I'm really considering revising this because it really has been developed, used internationally, and it's nice to go ahead and do the second iteration of it. Dissonance is an interesting one to look at because it's culturally determined. And so here is that particular model, and for us, the difficulty has been the application of it has been the discovery and exploration of dissonance, because I think people don't see that. Another issue has been people are very worried when they do this analysis and all the messages are at the sharing and comparing of information. And you know, it's okay because sometimes you will not see people going into the fifth level. In our one we did, because our people who were really, who were in this debate, who participated in this discussion were professionals in the field. And so they were able to take it to the final level of applying knowledge in real life. But in many conferences, you might only get sharing and comparing of information. So it's okay, but it's okay to report that the discussion was at that level. But one of the things a moderator can do or a facilitator can do is to encourage them to move towards the more higher order learning, you know, the creation of something new. Also, it depends on how the discussion is set up. And if it's just to react to a reading, most probably, it might be just at the first level. But if they are supposed to develop a new product, it might go to the third, fourth level. Okay?
Sorry, just a question.
Yes.
If I have understood, not only the culture determines the dissonance, also the technology or the...
and also the assignment.
The design of
the assignment. How you tell them. Yeah. Now, if it's a discussion, what you say has to happen in the discussion. Right. Now, in one of my modules is they have to look at how e-learning can be used to solve global problems. And the problem that we have designed is a negotiation exercise between the US and Mexico on sharing water rights of the Rio Grande River, which flows through Albuquerque, which is relevant to us. But I have a team of Mexicans and US, and the team consists of a politician, an environmentalist, and a farmer. And these three people in each of the teams have to negotiate how to share the water of the Rio Grande. And actually, this was very appropriate because we had a drought in the US at that time, and people were very concerned about water rights. Water rights is a big issue that's going to plague this world in the future. I mean, in Barcelona, for example, you have the water issue, right? Right. So people really got into it. The issue was they had to negotiate an agreement. This group didn't really come to an agreement. It's a difficult problem to solve, and they realized why it's difficult to come to agreement. But you saw more of the negotiation of meaning and construction of knowledge because of the way the exercise was set up. So that is important. Okay. Finally, I would like to talk to you a little bit about a theoretical framework we are developing for assessing learning in Web 2.0 applications. And Web 2.0 applications that we've selected are what we call the group of collective intelligence applications, such as based on a wiki. Okay, and we use the Wenger and Wenger-McDermott's concept of, actually it's Leib and Wenger who started it, but then Wenger and McDermott, etc., who published later, developed this concept of domain, community, and practice, which I'm sure you are familiar with it. We looked at what happens, what are the learning theories that help us explain domain, community, and practice. And according to them, domain is really the goal that you would work towards. Community is comprised of the community members, and practice is what they engage in. So this is the structural framework for a community of practice. And based on this structural framework, how does learning happen as we utilize Web 2.0 technologies? In order to develop this paper, to develop a theoretical framework, we in my class, I was teaching a doctoral level seminar class last spring on advanced, it was called the Advanced Technology Seminar, and our topic was communities of practice, theoretical frameworks for communities of practice. So we functioned as a community of practice. We set up a wiki in PBWiki, and we started working on this paper. And what we felt was, I mean, it's not the greatest graphic, but I'll explain to you. Over here is the wiki, right? And then here, both the technology and people are interacting. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with this concept of distributed cognition, which says that people and tools interact to create meaning. It sort of relates to Vygotsky's idea about, tools as mediators of cognition. Okay, so when people and tools interact, they can produce things which face-to-face groups do not produce. The kind of production you have because of the because of the interaction of tools and technology is a little bit different. So here in the middle, we have the wiki, and all of us were interacting. We were meeting also face-to-face and interacting also online, contributing online. And in order to help us, we were using other kinds of Web 2.0 tools, such as, for example, Delicious. I think Delicious is here. We also used Flickr. We used blogs. We used different Web 2.0 technologies that were necessary for our task. And the process that we went through was, given the context is so important, we essentially engaged in discourse. And discourse is discussion, but there are different levels of discussion. If you look at it from a cultural sense, you have what is called primary discourse and secondary discourse. Primary discourse is what we bring through our cultural frameworks. Secondary discourse is what we develop as a result of negotiation. Then, based on that discourse, we acted. That is, we actually changed sections in the wiki based on that. Then we reflected on what we have developed in the wiki. And then we reorganized the entire wiki. And essentially, when we looked at the process that we went through, we felt that as a group, we had changed our thinking. So as a group, we reflected on our metacognitive processes, and we feel that we developed as a group and changed our perspective. So when we reflected on the thinking processes we went through as a group, because we kept notes as we went on, we kept notes of our group process, we felt that we arrived at what is called socially mediated metacognition. Now, metacognition is a very private thing. Metacognition is the reflection on our own learning and our own learning processes. However, our metacognition was socially mediated because we were interacting as a group. So we feel that the Web 2.0 technologies will enable us to move to socially mediated metacognition. So when that paper becomes available, I'll be glad to share it with you. So I like to finish at that point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.